We all know that Planetside isn't very new player friendly. You get thrown to a chaotic battlefield that has way too much going on at first glance. It's an issue that various dev teams have been trying to fix since launch, but hasn't seen much progress over the years. I want to offer a different perspective by going one step beyond the newest player experience and explain why a lot of these changes ended up hurting the entire player base involved. Let's just start with the obvious. The new player experience of straight up dying your first few hours isn't really fixable. With 80 plus players jammed into sometimes too small bases, you will inevitably run into something that takes you out as a new player. That's a universal experience, and even an extra 50 HP only prevents a few percent of those deaths until you slowly figure out what not to do. Which is a good thing, to be clear. Changes like Nano Weave getting closer to a normalized time to kill, and the auxiliary shield letting new players live just one more bullet are specifically made to grant them a few percentages of an advantage, before they figure out better alternatives. The problem lies with many other tools that are designed to even the playing field between new players and experienced ones by being easier to use. For one, some of them are still way worse despite looking impressive, being your typical noob trap. Others will actually even the playing field, but enable bad habits to stifle improvement, and different ones are zero effort guns that basically grant free XP to get those dopamine hits, but make for unengaging gameplay both for the user and the player on the other end. I will give an exhaustive list later on, but as an example for noob traps, you've got coyotes, tools enabling bad habits are stuff like unstable ammo, and free dopamine guns are things like the thumper. Let's get back to that step beyond the new player experience I was talking about. Let's say you have a new player that gets drawn in by the massive battles and cool explosions while dying throughout it all, and he's starting to slowly figure things out. The cool back of the box moments will fade out over time, and what we're left with is a video game that you play by engaging with its mechanics. So now our new player has to figure out how to keep up with the big boys that have already played for 7 or 8 years. There's two ways this can go. They try to get better at the game and explore Planetside's gunplay mechanics more deeply, which in my opinion gives them a good chance to get pulled in and enjoy their time, because PS2's core mechanics are really good, and quad-linking other players can be borderline addicting. The other way is that they stumble into one of the noob traps. Maybe because they asked how to get certs fast on Reddit and somebody said to spam revives and choke points. Now they're getting killed by a thumper over and over, so they think, wow, the thumper is so OP, it keeps killing me. They buy it themselves and it's just hella boring. They assume that's all there is to the game, so you might as well play fucking Fortnite or something. And that's just a hypothetical. Players in video games will always take the path of the least resistance. So one way or another, they will discover any of those skill compression tools eventually, if they don't quit beforehand. In the end, the video game has to be compelling by being fun to play. Progression and skill expression can go hand in hand in Planetside to make for a great experience, but all those tools stop players in their tracks by letting them only progress their level instead of themselves as a player. On top of that, experienced players can use all of those tools too, and in way more annoying ways. Things like the Thumper or Helios can be the reason new players quit when they were supposed to help them, because of how frustrating it is to play against them. All that to say, the players that make it past the quote-unquote new player experience are still likely not to stay around, because of a lot of these additions. Over the years they've taken focus away or actively degraded the compelling parts of the game that people stick around for. And that doesn't only apply to new players, everyone's experience suffers from it. Contrary to the last video, I'm gonna go a little more nuclear in an attempt to fix this problem. All these tools need to be entirely removed from the game. They're a net negative to Planetside 2, and I don't think any kind of rework is gonna change that. Let's go over them with some quick explanations. Scorpion. The Scorpion is the pinnacle of non-gameplay. Neither side of the interaction ends up seeing another player. The only feedback is hit markers on one side, and nearly untraceable damage on the other side. It's not a farming machine, it's not a tactical tool, it just makes annoying stalemates more annoying, while the shooter doesn't even need to take a tiny bit of risk. Unstable ammo and kneecap ammo. Headshots are a core feature of Planetside 2 and almost every other FPS game for a reason. They increase the skills healing by a lot, creating more interesting gameplay and skill expression that way. For me, headshots are a big part of why the game is so fun, especially the visual feedback you get from them. Unstable and kneecap ammo disincentivize headshotting and in return give you a hitbox modification or extra damage shooting lengths. This is problematic for two reasons. For one, if you go up against a better player, those will still not help you enough to win the fight. The 2x damage multiplier will always remain king. Secondly, they hinder you from learning how to shoot heads better and lock you away from one of the most fun parts of the game. This is obviously a somewhat subjective opinion, but its gunplay is one of Planetside's biggest strengths, so even giving players an option to ignore it is a bad idea. Thumper, Helios and the underbarrel grenade launcher. These are once again weapons that entirely ignore Planetside's gunplay, trapping them in a playstyle that doesn't have any longevity. Only the most deranged people will spend time quote-unquote mastering the Thumper, cause there isn't very much to master. As an added effect, they get spammed in choke points to make them even less fun to play. The underbarrel grenade launcher doesn't have to get entirely removed, but it should not be on as many weapons as it is right now. Stalker Cloak. Another instance of non-gameplay, now with even less gameplay. Stalker Cloak can have its cool moments, but things rarely shake out how you want them to if you don't know what you're doing. So it just ends up as another source of frustration for both the user and the target. I gave a more nuanced take on changing it in the last video, but just entirely removing it would work too. Heavy Crossbow. The heavy crossbow will only ever be complete dogshit when it doesn't one-hit, or too good when it does. Either way, it's unwieldy and annoying to use. Another noob trap that doesn't need to be in the game. Construction. It doesn't interact with the game, creates unfun fights, pulls people away from the actual interesting gameplay Planetside can provide, and with the Cortium vehicle pulling mechanic, it managed to even trivialize vehicle battles in the game. I could go further in depth here, but that would take too much time in this video. Heavy barrel and angled forward grip. These attachments, along with other changes in the Arsenal update, took a step towards trivializing recoil management in the game while giving drawbacks that are very significant, but hard to quantify for new players. They aren't very useful, as more experienced players will realize that movement and managing your horizontal recoil are two of the most important factors in doing well at Planetside infantry combat, so the attachments end up hindering a new player's progression in the long term. Underwater combat. Another topic I could spend much longer on, but the very short breakdown is that underwater combat completely removes movement from the gameplay, which means that whoever shoots first wins. That, together with the slow gameplay and low velocity, makes for the most unfun experience Planetside has to offer right now, and while it might favor new players, it's not representative of any of the other fights in the game. Ground-to-air rocket launchers. The ground-to-air launchers should not have become default and should not have been buffed as much as they have been. It's been statistically proven that this change did not impact the performance of air-to-ground weapons at all. It has rather achieved the opposite. If you want a more in-depth explanation, you can check out a Reddit post from Punisher Iceman. What has actually made a difference was directly nerfing the problematic weapon. Big fucking surprise. The standard dumbfire launcher should be back in its original slot, as its drop is much more intuitive and more rewarding to use than ground-to-air launchers. The ESF radar. Most new ESF pilots won't be aware enough to make good use of the radar and won't have the certs to invest into stealth and take advantage of it. More experienced players with fully certed stealth modules will be able to hunt and sneak up on less aware pilots and get free kills on them. The ESF radar essentially ended up achieving the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. Tomcats and Coyotes. These two are the absolute perfect examples of noob traps. Especially Coyotes will not win anyone a fight against anything. A nose gun will outperform it at any point in time, and Coyote users aren't getting the practice they need to ever catch up to better pilots. Tomcats have a niche against bigger aircraft, but are completely outclassed by Havocs, and still out-repairable. Revive grenades. This might not be a take you'd expect from me, but I'd be interested to know how Planetside would play out without revive grenades in the mix. It feels like squad gameplay and team play in general have been eclipsed by routers, revive nades, abusing deployables, and vehicle spam. I'd love to see a more stripped back form of point holding come back, and this would be a step towards that. The goal with removing those tools from the game is to provide a less negatively messy environment for new players to enter and learn in. Back when I joined the game in 2013, the gunplay combined with the atmosphere of massive battles is what really drew me in. Even playing at 40 FPS, the game kept me interested by not being completely overwhelming, but still giving a sense of awe when entering massive fights. I feel like the feature overload that has slowly crept in over the years won't allow something like that to happen anymore. I'd love to know how your new player experience was and what kept you playing or what didn't keep you playing, especially players that joined more recently. Until then, I'll see you for the next video.